0247, the Strait of Hormuz, latitude 26 north, inside the USS Carney's Combat Information Center. A sensor tech just slammed his fist onto a console signal detected Vishna-class intelligence ship bearing 180. They're bridging a live targeting feed to the Iranian mainland on the flight deck 50 ME away. A pair of EA-18G Growlers shriek into the dark. If that Russian signal isn't cut in the next 90 seconds, a volley of Iranian missiles will have a perfect lock on 5,000 American sailors. The TAO has 11 seconds to call the intercept. If he misses it, a $13 billion carrier strike group becomes the target of a saturation strike. Here is how that 12-minute countdown begins. The Russian Vishna-class spy ship, the Victor Leong, was sitting like a silent predator 12 mi off the Iranian coast. For days, it had been operating as a digital bridge. The Iranians were being jammed into oblivion by U.S. electronic warfare, but the Russians were using a loophole. They were acting as a proxy radar. The Leonov used its passive sensors to track the thermal wakes of U.S. destroyers and then relayed that data through a hardened high-frequency uplink to Iranian anti-ship batteries hidden in the limestone cliffs of Bandar Abbas. Growlers are feet dry, the radio crackled. The two EA-18G Growlers tore through the electromagnetic spectrum. The pilots activated the ALQ-218 tactical jamming pods. On the Russian ship below, the screens didn't just go fuzzy, they inverted. The U.S. Growlers weren't just flooding the signal with noise. They were digital hijackers. They intercepted the Russian uplink and began feeding it a loop of fake telemetry. Suddenly, the Iranian missile batteries relying on the Russian eyes saw the U.S. fleet jump 50 miles to the south on their displays. The bold move Moscow thought would humiliate the Fifth Fleet was now a digital cage. The Leonov was still transmitting, but it was now screaming lies. Moscow had tried to hand Iran the keys to the Gulf, but the U.S. just changed the locks while the Russians were still turning the handle. Commander Hayes on the bridge of the USS Carney watched the signal strength on his glass display drop to 0. "Bridge them," he ordered. He wasn't talking about a radio call. He was talking about a physical blockade. The Carney, a 9,000-ton beast of steel and fire, accelerated to 35 mph, slicing through the dark water to place itself directly between the Russian ship and the Iranian coast. This was the Shroud. The Russian spy ship was now blind, deaf, and physically trapped by an American destroyer that was painting it with fire control radar just to let them know, "We see you, we own you." While the electronic battle was being won in the nanoseconds of the ether, the horizon was about to explode with the weight of American naval power. For weeks, the USS Gerald R. Ford and the USS Abraham Lincoln had been holding a tense line, keeping the strait open. But at 0300, the hat tick arrived. The USS George H.W. Bush surged into the region fresh off a high-speed transit from the Atlantic. This is the hat trick, the rare and terrifying concentration of 3 nuclear supercarriers in a single theater of operations. We are talking about 300,000 tons of sovereign American territory, carrying over 240 advanced strike aircraft and enough BGM-1009 Tomahawk missiles to level a medium-sized country. The Bush didn't just arrive, it brought the kill web. By integrating its sensors with the Ford and the Lincoln, the U.S. Fifth Fleet created a system of systems that covered every square inch of the Persian Gulf. The Russian intelligence officers aboard the Leonov watched their legacy radar screens saturate with over 1,000 ghost targets generated by the U.S. Fleet coordinated jamming. At 0304, the Iranians tried to test the perimeter. An IRGC Cayman-22 drone, likely launched to see if the Russian data bridge was still alive, crossed the red line 40 mi out from the carrier group. It didn't get a warning. The USS Carney launched a RY-M-174 Standard Extended Range Active Missile SM-6. The SMO's M6 is a $4.3 million masterpiece. It doesn't just fly, it hunts. It can hit targets at the edge of space or intercept low-flying threats over the horizon using its own active radar seeker. The drone was vaporized at $25,000 FT. The explosion was so clean, it didn't even leave a thermal bloom on the Russian sensors. The Haddock wasn't just a show of force, it was a total exclusion zone. While the U.S. Fifth Fleet was physically and electronically pinning the Russian and Iranian naval forces, the Israeli Air Force saw the window they had been waiting for. This was the parallel coordination that Moscow had failed to predict. Using the chaos and the total electronic blackout created by the U.S. Fifth Fleet Growlers, a squadron of Israeli F-35 Adair stealth jets slipped into Iranian airspace. They weren't flying blind. They were receiving a direct God's eye view feed from U.S. Navy E-2D Hawkeyes via Link 16. Their objective? 3 secret stone-hardened missile silos buried deep in the Zagros Mountains. These weren't standard bases. They were the production facilities for Iran's new hypersonic prototypes tech that Russia had covertly smuggled into Iran under the guise of civilian energy equipment. The U.S. Fifth Fleet ensured that no Russian satellite or Iranian radar could see the strike coming. The U.S. destroyers positioned themselves in a line of sight blockade, emitting massive amounts of electronic clutter that effectively created a digital fog over the Zagros flight paths. At 3:12, the Israeli jets released the AGM-154 Joint Standoff weapon. The JSC is a stealthy glide bomb that allows the pilot to stay 60 meters away from the target's air defenses. It doesn't have an engine. It uses its wings to glide silently through the thin mountain air. 3 bases, 3 impacts. The JSC munitions punch through the reinforced ventilation shafts with surgical precision. The secondary explosions were so massive, they registered as a 3.2 magnitude earthquake on regional seismographs. The Russian technical advisors at the site didn't even have time to reach for their boots. The parallel coordination worked perfectly. The U.S. provided the shroud and Israel delivered the hammer. The commander of the Russian Victor Leong made one final desperate move. He ordered his ship to execute a 180-degree turn and accelerate toward the USS George H.W. Bush, attempting to get close enough to use legacy passive sensors that couldn't be jammed. It was a bluff, a game of maritime chicken that Russians have played since the Cold War. He was met with the wall. A U.S. fast attack submarine, the USS Florida, performed a tactical surface just 200 YD off the Russian ship's port bow. A 560 FT black hole suddenly emerged from the waves like a sea monster. The USS Florida is an Ohio-class beast that carries 154 BGM-109 Tomahawk land attack missiles. Seeing that black sail emerge is the ultimate psychological checkmate. A single BGM-109 Tomahawk can loiter over a target for hours, waiting for a command to strike. The Russian commander knew that if he uncovered a single defensive gun, the USS Florida could ripple fire a dozen Tomahawk missiles before his crew could even sound the alarm. To drive the point home, 2 Mir-60R Seahawk helicopters hovered 50 FT above the Leonov's bridge, their rotor wash coating the Russian antenna arrays in corrosive sea spray. The message wasn't subtle. You are not a player in this game. You are a target. The Leonov cut its engines. It went dark. The Russian bold move had officially ended in a humiliating silence. The 12-minute window was a masterclass in integrated lethality. To maintain the blockade of Russian intel and ensure the Israeli strike remained invisible, the Fifth Fleet utilized AGM-88 HARM carried by the Growlers. These were locked onto every Iranian coastal radar. The U.S. pilots didn't fire. The mere lock-on warning on the Iranian screens caused the operators to shut down their systems in terror. A radar that is turned off is a radar that is useless. The RUM-139 VLA also resorted to when an Iranian Gadir-class sub tried to slip out of port to shadow the carriers. The USS Laboon launched a RUM-139 VLA. This rocket carries a Mark 54 torpedo that drops into the water miles away, moving at 600 mph through the air to intercept a sub before it even clears the harbor. The Iranian sub immediately executed an emergency reverse. The last one is RIM-162 Smemeters. This is used for point defense against a volley of probing rockets launched from IRGC fast attack boats. The RIM-162 ESSM can perform 50G turns, meaning it can hit a target the size of a surfboard moving at supersonic speeds. The economic math of the night was devastating. Russia spent millions on a covert SIGINT operation that was dismantled in minutes. Iran lost $200 million in hypersonic research and 3 secret bases. The U.S. Navy, meanwhile, treated the entire engagement as a routine routine training event. This is the satisfaction of efficiency, when a superpower doesn't just win a fight, but makes the enemy realize they shouldn't have started it in the first place. Moscow's failure was a failure of imagination. They assumed the U.S. would react to their bold move with traditional diplomatic or legacy military protocols. They didn't realize they were fighting a system of systems. The data that allowed the Israeli jets to destroy the Iranian bases clause in a static map. It was a live kill chain. The information started 500 meters up with a KH-11 satellite, was filtered through an E-2D Hawkeye circling the Gulf, and was delivered to the JSC munitions in the Zagros Mountains. The U.S. Fifth Fleet acted as the information gatekeeper by integrating the Ford, the Lincoln, and the Bush into a single sensor network. They created a battle space where the U.S. and Israel had a 100% information advantage, while the Russians and Iranians were operating in a total information blackout. This is why the decision speed was so lopsided. A U.S. tactical action officer on a destroyer two has the autonomy to assign an SM-6 to a target in under 3 seconds. The Russian commander of the Leonov had to wait for a satellite link back to the Kremlin just to ask permission to change course. By the time Moscow responded, the battle was already over. Despite the billions of dollars in Tomahawk missiles and stealth jets, the night belonged to the human element. The U.S. Fifth Fleet sailors didn't hesitate. Think about the Teo on watch. He had 11 seconds to call the SM-6 intercept on the Cayman-22 drone. He didn't check with Washington. He didn't ask for a second opinion. He trusted the Aegis system and his training. That level of professional autonomy is what makes the American war machine unstoppable. Contrast this with the IRGC crews. When the JSCO munitions hit their hangars, the Iranian soldiers were still trying to figure out why their radar wasn't working. They were waiting for orders that never came because their communications had been vaporized by U.S. jamming. This is the difference between a worked force and a legacy force, the speed of the human decision. By 400 a.m., the Strait of Hormuz was silent. The Russian Viktor Leonov was limping back toward international waters at sensitive electronic arrays, likely fried by the intensity of the U.S. growlers. The Iranian anti-ship batteries had gone silent. Their Russian data bridge shattered beyond repair. The USS George H.W. Bush took its position in the carrier line. 3 carriers, 3 cities of steel, 1 unified purpose. Trillions of dollars in global energy continued to flow through the strait undisturbed by the shadow war that had just played out. The haddock of 3 carriers wasn't just a show of force, it was a promise. A promise that any attempt to destabilize the region or provide secret intelligence to U.S. adversaries would be met with an immediate and overwhelming eraser. Moscow had tried to move the pieces on the board, but the Fifth Fleet just took the board away. For the sailors on the Carney, it was time for breakfast. They didn't celebrate, they didn't cheer, they just handed over the watch to the next shift. The Russian move was discovered, the threat was neutralized, the secret bases were destroyed, and for the world's most powerful fleet, it was just another Tuesday at the office. As the sun rose over the Gulf, the strategic reality was clear. In modern naval warfare, the winner is the one who controls the flow of information. Russia tried to weaponize data for Iran, and they were checkmated by a force that defined the very rules of data warfare. The U.S. Fifth Fleet didn't win because they had more missiles. They won because their missiles were smarter, faster, and linked to a God's eye view that the enemy couldn't even imagine. By integrating their sensors with Israeli intelligence and U.S. space assets, they created a battle space where the enemy was defeated before they even knew they were in a fight. What part of this 12-minute strike was the most shocking to you? Was it the sheer power of the 3-carrier hat tick or the precision of the JSO munitions hitting the mountain bases? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We read your tactical analyses to see how you view the future of global